on the Dallas Opera Network. You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, yes, it is America's talk radio show about opera. It's called Opera Box Score. I'm George Cedarquist, joined this week by Oliver Camacho, Matt Cummings, although he's not visible, and Weston Williams. All right, this week, a personal hero of the OBS's own. OC is inducted into the Hall of Fame. I'm going to give you a few hints. He's one of his generation's pioneering Rossini singers. He's from Queens. And Sir Georg Solti once told him that he has Mozart and Verdi in his throat. Keep listening if you haven't already figured that out. And 2-minute drill. Hey, COVID is over in Atlanta. So now you are free to move to Georgia and vote in their gubernatorial election. Hey, if you're watching on TDO, make sure you subscribe to that podcast, get the full show. Stitcher, Spotify, you click follow. Apple Podcasts, just hit the plus sign. It's that easy. You can also send us a voice memo from your phone or email us your hot takes, operaboxscore@gmail.com. You're going to get that beer coaster and that OBS lapel pin. Oliver Camacho, there he is. Look at that.
So speaking
yellow
of feedback from our listeners, we did get some feedback from one of our favorite listeners, Kenny. I hear you, Kenny. But I just want to say I was listening last week because I wasn't on the show, and so many times I'm like, no, wrong, no. So that's my feedback, you guys. No. Wrong again. No.
I guess we'll keep that one between Oliver and Kenny. I'm still trying to think of that fifth handle opera, by the way. I'm just stuck.
You've had time.
Weston Williams, how are you?
I just sitting pretty with my knowledge of exactly 6 handle operas, just ready to go at any time.
How dare you, Dan. Cubs baseball has started. They managed to get into a bench-clearing brawl in the second game of the season.
Nice.
I think that's a record, probably, that was against the hated Milwaukee Brewers. All right, let us talk some opera.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, this is OBS Hall of Famer, our enthusiastic, yet humble, salute to a distinguished opera artist who has gone above and beyond to contribute greatly, distinctively, and with grand significance to the art and honor of opera.
This tenor that we're about to talk about is one of my personal heroes, and I used to have his headshot on my piano.
Did you really?
I did. I still have it. I don't have it with me, and I brought it to work, but I used to just stare at that gorgeous face of his so that I could be inspired to sing.
Look at you now.
To sing as beautifully as he did, to do coloratura licks as well as he did, and to try to have a jawline like his. Hard to imitate somebody's jawline, I will say, but maybe the reason why I failed as a singer is because I thought I could sound like Frank Lepardo. But it's a very unique voice, has a very unique technique, and he had chops for days. And in a way, he represents the beginning of the Renaissance for Rossini operas, the tenor parts in Rossini operas. Now, we've always had great mezzos and sopranos who could sing this music, but somehow we were always deprived of a healthy, athletic sound in this music until, well, you'll hear the conversation that Matt and I have about the flourishing of the Rossini tenor, which Frank Lepardo was a part of. Let's hear a little bit of Frank Lepardo from his recording of Barber Seville. Well, I got Matt to join me for this special Hall of Fame because we're going to talk about the rise of the Rossini tenor. And
a repertoire that's very near and dear to both of our hearts, I know.
Yes, and in so doing, we are inducting one of my personal heroes, Frank Lepardo, American tenor Frank Lepardo, into the OBS Hall of Fame. And for those of you kids out there, you know that meme where it's like the first part of the meme is, the mother says, you have so-and-so at home. And then there's like the second half of the meme is like, and that's a picture of what the so-and-so is, but like all janky.
Yeah. Or like deconstructed.
Right. So, your pre 90s Rossini tenor is not the same thing as the Rossini tenors we now have that just seem to pop up out of nowhere. But obviously the great Rossini tenors of the moment are René Barbara and Juan Diego Flores and
Javier Camarena.
And
friend of the show, Larry Brownlee, of course.
Friend of the show, Larry Brownlee. But before that, let's just take it back to pre-1980s. The people who you would find singing in Rossini operas are what were lovingly considered to be tenore di grazie, the tenors of grace. And they were singers, mostly Italian, some Australian and English, who had the sweetness in their tone to sing a Rossini cantilena.
Literally get the notes out, you mean? Usually. Most of the notes out, most of the time.
When it came to the cabaletta part, more often than not, the solution was just to cut the cabaletta up so that they only had to sing a couple phrases. In some more difficult roles, about high-lying Rossini roles, the solution would be just cut the aria altogether. But, in an opera like Barber of Seville, you can't really cut Count Almaviva's first aria. You can cut the second one, but you can't cut the first one. So
until recently, most people did cut the second one.
Yeah. You might get an Ecco ridente in cello cabaletta that sounds like this. I won't shame this tenor, but here's a tenor who sang a lot in these Rossini operas. Props to him. He did what he could, at the time, but that was about as fast as he could do it, and he still couldn't quite, sing all of the notes.
And the approach is very croony, and there's no cut, there's no excitement in the tone like you would expect today from Juan Diego Flores is 97% cut. So,
so this is what we had. This is what I had when I was coming up if I wanted to listen to Rossini. But then, because I'm the perfect age to have seen this happen, we get a tenor like Rockwell Blake, who I forget what the marketing used to be on him, but that he could sing 64 notes per second or something like that. There was some weird thing that was attached to him, the fastest tenor around. And he definitely had the speed in his voice and a virile American sound. I think, if anything, American voices can be known for, American male voices, is just that athleticism. Mm-hmm. Maybe if not graceful, there's always we're the jocks, of the opera world.
it can get a little unwieldy, but in terms of like the tone quality and the vowels in particular, but the excitement is always there.
Yeah.
And the rhythm is always there.
Purely
and,
a vowel will never be Rockwell Blake's.
But you are never, ever, ever gonna have to compromise on speed with Rockwell Blake.
Yeah.
And or like the ridiculous phrasing choices that he can make.
If you have never heard Rockwell Blake, why don't you go out there and listen to some Rockwell Blake? There's plenty of him out there, and it's actually very exciting. Like, he was, I think, the first person I heard sing that Terra Amica from Zelmira, which has a really fun hook in it. And he
that has a high D in the main theme of the aria, which means you have to sing it 17 times.
Yeah. And another tenor who came up in the 80s, and whose principal career was in the late 80s and early 90s, was the Mexican tenor Francisco Araiza, who had a little bit more of a bel canto tone. Maybe didn't sing as fast as Rockwell Blake, but he could articulate, and he tended to put a tiny little glottal stroke in his Rossini, so that you could hear some of those faster notes. Mm-hmm. I think of him as more of a Mozart tenor than I think of him as a Rossini tenor.
But he's on a lot of those recordings from the mid-90s. Like he's on all of those recordings with Neville Mariner when they're just trying to get a little bit fleeter, a little bit more historically informed, but without throwing the baby out. Yeah,
well, his Cenerentola with Agnes Balsa.
I love that recording.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then comes around this guy named Frank Lepardo, who grew up in Queens and was studying at Juilliard, and apparently didn't come from a lot of affluence, and used to, take long walks and long train rides to get to school. And from what I understand, I talked to him actually for my show last week on WFMT. He was a bit of a rebel, tattoos and really heavily worked out, stacked and long hair, leather jacket type of guy. And he didn't really fit the mold of a Juilliard student at the time. And it turns out that Juilliard thought the exact same thing, and they relieved him of his scholarship, and he had to discontinue his studies. That's a nice way to put it. He had to discontinue his studies.
You'll never work in this town again.
At Juilliard. But maybe that was the thing that gave him an edge, because he found his own teacher, a guy named Dr. Robert White, and Dr. White taught him how to really develop his falsetto, and also encouraged him to take it easy on the weights. When Frank Lepardo was a student, he had listened to a lot of Richard Tucker as his favorite tenor. And he had this sort of muscular quality in his voice that his teacher tried to dissuade him from. And go, explore his falsetto. Mm-hmm. And I think his professional debut was singing Fenton, but he discovered that he could sing coloratura, and
there's nothing like that in Fenton, which that's all very high and floaty.
Right, it's like Nanetta, but you're a man,
And then you have to pop out a really huge B flat at the end of your aria,
and you don't get any applause because it goes right into
into a duet.
Yeah. So he learned how to sing Barber Seville, and he began to get contracts for that. But he also, I believe, was heard by Claudio Abbado. I forget when, he told me when, but Claudio Abbado heard him sing and invited him to participate in a Vienna production of L'Italiana in Algeri, which was a vehicle at the time for the great Agnes Balsa. And also in the cast were Ruggero Raimondi as Mustafa and Enzo Dara as, is it Ali? Is that the name of the character?
Mm-hmm.
So
he's probably the tutor, Enzo Dara.
Taddeo.
Yeah.
Okay. So a deluxe Italian / one Greek cast of people who have been
spicy Greek.
Yeah, who have been doing this repertoire their whole lives, and this one American, Frank Lepardo. And Frank told me that when they had their first musical rehearsal, he was in this tiny room, a room that was too small for all of these people to be sitting in. And, Italiana basically is an overture followed by the first aria of Lindoro. So he was the first person to get up and really have to sing in front of this.
Yeah, there's like a little silly trio right before it, but nothing as memorable
Elvira
as
and whatever. So the first big sing is Frank Lepardo's Languire per una bella. And he was nervous as F. And he did it, and he said he probably oversang it because he was like trying to
could you possibly oversing? So those of you who have never tried to, have you ever tried to learn that aria? Have you tried?
Yeah, I know. Actually, I can sing it with lots of breaks in between.
Exactly. It is relentless. Speaking of high notes, and I one time counted, there are 27 B flats in the cabaletta of that aria because it is again in the main theme, and it is just relentless. And you get to the last page and you have to do a run for 3 systems, and then you do it again, and then you go up to the top and come back down, and go up to the top and come back down, and go up to the top and come back down, just like a tightrope walk for 7 minutes, 6 minutes. But it's amazing.
Well, let's hear. This is the recording that they made of this opera. After that Vienna production, let's hear the aria Languire per una bella. We'll jump right into the cabaletta. So this is the type of singing that we did not have before Lepardo and Araiza and Rockwell Blake came along. And I think it opened up a whole world of possibilities. And suddenly you could cast a bel canto opera and really, do the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And, the other parts can be exciting as well. And we really learned more about these operas because I'll actually listen to that whole opera now, and I won't just fast forward to the Marilyn Horne and Joan Sutherland duets,
And all those old recordings also, they're so cut to ribbons. Philip Gossett talks about this a lot in his book about Italian opera, that when you cut it, the structure feels so imbalanced that actually it feels longer and more tedious than if you have all the repeats in and it, works the way it's supposed to do. But in order for it to work the way it's supposed to, you need people who can get all those notes out and not get fatigued for 5 pages of cadential materials and keep the excitement building without topping out.
Right.
And when you've got a Cadillac of a voice like that is so beautiful and interesting and virile, but also very flexible, shockingly flexible for how much tone there is. It's really exciting.
Well, So, as I said, I spoke to Frank Lepardo on my show for my other job, and he talked to me about how Don Ottavio is actually the role that he most identifies with. And this is now moving to Mozart a little bit, and how everything, that is, signature about his sound, you can find in the role of Don Ottavio. The way he utterly floats Dalla sua pace, which is one of the most difficult arias ever written, but is somehow given to young tenors who are just learning how to sing.
It only goes up to a G, so it must be easy.
Yeah, just to discourage. I think it's meant to discourage people from studying voice.
Well, wasn't it kind of written as an FU for that first singer who for the Vienna production, because he thought Il mio tesoro was too hard, and Mozart was like, "I'll show you too hard."
So, for those of you who don't know Dalla sua pace, it is Don Ottavio's first aria that he sings after Donna Anna is like, I want revenge. I'm going to kill this guy. He's like, oh, but peace. That's his response. It rides the passaggio the entire time, and it has a de-emphasized syllable of a word on the highest note in the phrase. So you have to, and it's just a G. So you have to figure out how to crescendo a phrase and then diminuendo right where your voice doesn't want to.
Yeah, in an area that's very difficult to navigate, and you're like, I almost wish this were a step higher so that I had a little bit more wiggle room, but no, I don't.
Notoriously difficult. But if you listen to Frank Lepardo sing, and actually we're going to listen to a little bit of him singing it right now, just how he was able to do this so sweetly and really make something beautiful out of this aria, which can be very boring if it's not done well, and also can be torture for the tenor singing it, and maybe torture for the audience because we hear that you're having trouble in it. So here is from another starry cast recording. This is led by Riccardo Muti from the EMI recording that includes Sam Raimi as Leporello, Cheryl Studer as Donna Anna, Carol Vanis is Donna Elvira on this recording. But here is Frank Lepardo, Dalla sua pace. So the story goes that Frank Lepardo was singing, I think, the Berlioz Requiem, maybe, somewhere in Boston. And another very high, thankless solo.
Like all Berlioz tenor music. High and thankless.
Yeah. And Solti was in town and Frank Lepardo's manager scored him an audition. And apparently Frank Lepardo wasn't expecting to give an audition, had none of his music, he didn't have his folder with his tabs and all of his whatever, And so he had to go to the library and get photocopies. But he sang
mimeographs.
Yes. They call us dittos. He sang for Georg Solti, and Georg Solti commented to him, which apparently was something that Solti didn't really ever do, telling him that you have Mozart and Verdi in your throat. And soon after, he was cast in the famous La Traviata from the Royal Opera House Covent Garden, which became the star vehicle for Angela Gheorghiu. He was engaged to do that, but before that contract came came to fruition, he was cast suddenly in a recording of Così fan tutte that was supposed to star Luca Canoncini. Luca Canoncini, I believe, backed out of it or something happened, and he had to fill in singing Ferrando in Renee Fleming's first full opera recording,
right?
Così fan tutte. So another great opportunity for Frank Lepardo. But as I said, he was also very shortly going to go to England and sing this Traviata, which begins sort of like, not the end of Frank Lepardo's career, but it's the last commercial recording that he made. Mm-hmm. And he sang this Alfredo, which is on video and everything. And Frank told me that he wasn't expecting it to be recorded or to become a movie, but because Angela Gheorghiu was becoming such a big star because of that production,
especially in that role,
they decided to just make everything out of it. And so his interpretation of Alfredo is now immortalized as the duet partner for Angela Gheorghiu. Lyric Opera of Chicago, where we're coming to you from, Chicago, was the house where he made his big American breakthrough, singing the role of Elvino in Sonnambula with Cecilia Gazdia, 1988.
Again, that was high and thankless.
Yes, and that was a year before he had his first contract at the Met, singing Barbara Seville. And it also was the house where he retired. Lyric gave him many important engagements. He was sort of the house tenor for a couple of years, singing Lenski and Eugene Onegin, Rodolfo in La Bohème, Gabriele Adorno in Simon Boccanegra, and probably his largest assignment, Riccardo in Un ballo in maschera. And
opposite my bae, Sandra.
I know. Did you go to that? I was there. Were you? Okay. So that is when. So Frank Lepardo told me that he decided to retire when in his 50s because he felt he was already beginning to get fewer and fewer engagements, and he didn't want to be one of those tenors that stuck around for too long.
Or become a baritone. He didn't want to become one particular tenor.
But we are talking about how before Frank Lepardo, there weren't really, before Frank Lepardo, Rocco Blake, and Francisco Reza, we didn't really have great Rossini singing. And I guess we want to finish, but we're going to finish with one more Rossini track, but is there something else you want to say about the importance of Frank Lepardo's career in the American, the scene, and also for bel canto and for...
Well, they just are a very important bridge into the next generation of singers, beyond, and even beyond Flores, the ones that we named earlier, Flores, Brownlee, Camarena. Like Ramon Vargas sings that music beautifully. Mm-hmm. Raul Jimenez would not. We wouldn't have careers like that if we hadn't had the Frank Lepardos to get those operas to be done, and to get them to be done regularly, and to get them to be done well. And to help that music makes sense to a generation of singers who grew up learning to be able to sing it because they had role models.
Yeah. I mean, I thought I was going to become a Rossini tenor because
same here.
I loved his singing so much. I thought, oh my God, I want to sing like that. I want to be like whatever, boss. I have to say also that he is a great actor. And I wanted to say this, in that Italiana recording, which is maybe one most top to bottom, like complete comic bel canto opera recordings of all time. It's just joy from start to finish, and Agnes Balza is so amazing in that role. And Ruggero Remo, I mean, really, the cast top to bottom. But if you want to listen to a recording and just hear the entire thing and be just delighted, I do recommend that Italiana, as racist and problematic as that opera is.
Yeah, just don't pay too close attention to the plot because it doesn't make sense. It's mostly just racist jokes. But Agnes Balta is a voice to me that she sounds like she might catch on fire at any moment, like literally catch on fire. And when she's at her best and in a performance where everyone else kind of feels at that same level, like it is electric. And that recording is certainly electric.
Oh, yeah. And I meant to say that in that first Sitzprobe or rehearsal, did I say that Agnes Balza gave a wink to Claudia Abbado? Like, saying,
No.
oh. Yeah, she's like, oh, you got a tenor, didn't you? But I also want to recommend, and I'm loath to recommend it, but there is a recording of Barber of Seville out there, also led by Claudio Abbado.
The second Abbado.
Yes,
Barber.
Which stars Frank Lepardo as Almaviva. The dialogue in this recording that Frank Lepardo is in, the recitative, the psycho-recitative, are so good because he knows that role. So, I mean, he sang that role 1,000 times if he sang it once. It's so embodied and it's hilarious, especially that really annoying
the music teacher sequence where he's
Alonso, I forget.
Alonso.
Yeah, Don Alonso. The Don Alonso moment can be really tedious, but he is so funny in it. So I know that there's a person on that recording that we're not really talking about these days, and maybe it's a reason to avoid that recording in general. But just get yourself to your whatever way you listen to music, and just fast forward to Act 2 and listen to the recit after the Pace Gioia moment. It's so good. He does all these voices, and it's so colorful and well pronounced, and it's just, I adore it. So I'm going to recommend that. But we're going to close with some more Rossini. This is the Cabaletta of Idreno's second aria from a early 90s recording of Semiramide, which starred Cheryl Studer, and I forget who the mezzo is on that.
It's Jennifer Larmore.
And Jennifer Larmore, okay. Once again, Frank Lepardo.
Frank Lepardo inducted into the hallowed halls of the Opera Box Score Hall.
And you could hear him on listening to singers for about 10 days from the time you hear this. It's on the archive at WFMT until April 22nd.
A little sports talk before we get to the 2-minute drill. News from the Chicago Blackhawks. First of all, Marian Hossa was a hockey player who helped the Hawks to Stanley Cup trophies in the 2010s. He had played for other teams. Last week, he re-signed for the Hawks for 1 day so he could then immediately retire as a Chicago Blackhawk. That is what I call loyalty. In addition, get this, the Blackhawks are cutting their ticket prices by 20% across the board because not enough fans are going to the games.
It's the only place where inflation doesn't apply right
Apparently
now.
so at the United Center. I felt like they took a page out of like not-for-profit opera houses. I'm doing that.
Okay, before we move on, I just want to call out some stupidity. You know I love you, Stephanos, my Greek god. But Stefanos Tsitsipas, boy, did he put his foot in his mouth. I forget exactly for what platform, maybe for because French Open is going to happen soon-ish. He said that women shouldn't get paid as much as the men because men play 5-set matches. You know, men play 5-set matches exactly 4 tournaments a year out of the however many tournaments there are in the season. So yes, you play 5-set matches every 3 3 or 4 months. Wah, wah.
This just in. The 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
A new exhibition at Germany's National History Museum examines the legacy of the country's arguably most important and, much less arguably, most infamous composer, Richard Wagner. Included in the exhibit is an audio installation by Jewish director Barry Kosky, a mishmash of synagogue music interspersed with recordings of Jewish characters from Wagner's operas and selections from Wagner's Jewishness in Music essay read in Yiddish. The effect, according to Kosky, is, quote, deliberately nauseating.
In other nauseating news, Russian-based baritone Yevgeny Nikitin is slated to appear at the Mariinsky Theater under the baton of Putin ally conductor Valery Gergiev. If you're wondering why that name is triggering you, let us remind you that Yevgeny Nikitin is the same guy who was compelled to withdraw from a production at Bayreuth because of his swastika tattoos. At the time, he said he was, quote, not aware of the extent of the irritation and offense these signs and symbols would cause.
Meanwhile, a soprano who is on the slate next season at the Met, Albina Shagimuratova, will perform at the Russian state-funded Zaryadye Hall later this month. And we're also here to remind you that Peter Gelb stated that the Met would cut ties with, quote, artists or institutions that support Putin or are supported by him.
Soprano Olga Peretyako is 50% Russian, 50% Ukrainian, and 100% done with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Peretyako postponed her concert in Russia until October, peace pending.
A villa Tchaikovsky once lived in has been destroyed as a result of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. When the composer was 24, the Ukrainian city of Trostyanets was under the control of the Russian Empire, and it was there that Tchaikovsky composed his first symphonic work.
The Royal Opera House will produce an opera dramatizing the final days of grunge rock hero Kurt Cobain. Last Days will be adapted from the film of the same name by Gus Van Sant, which details the, last days of a young musician named Blake, loosely based on the iconic Nirvana frontman. The opera's composer, Oliver Leith, is the ROH's 31-year-old composer in residence and a self-described massive Nirvana fan.
In more royal news, the Royal Opera House has won in both opera categories at the 2022 Olivier Awards. Outstanding achievement in opera went to conductor Peter Whelan and the Irish Baroque Orchestra for Bayezet, beating out ENO's set and costume design for HMS Pinafore, sorry George, and mezzo-soprano Christine Rice's performance in 4/4, which also was at the Royal Opera House. Best New Opera Production went to Yenufa, which defeated Handel's Theodora and Vivaldi's Bayezet, all three at Royal Opera House, and poor ENO's Cunning Little Vixen.
Oh.
In England, you still can't compete with the Royals.
Atlanta Opera is cruising for a red card as it announced that it would no longer require proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test to attend. The company also said that masks were encouraged, but not required.
In trade news, English Touring Opera has announced that writer-director Robin Norton-Hale will be taking over as the general director in July. Says Norton-Hale, I'm delighted to be joining English Touring Opera, whose mission to make outstanding opera accessible to the widest possible audience has been an inspiration to me throughout my career.
On the disabled list, well, not quite disabled, on the pregnancy list, soprano Rosa Faiola will be replaced by Daniel Denise, taking over for her as Norina in all performances of Don Pasquale at Staatsoper Hamburg, opening in May.
Exit stage right, American tenor Stephen O'Mara has died at age 60. O'Mara had a long and distinguished worldwide career that included most of the Verdi and Puccini canon.
Soprano Maria Mull passed away in early April. She was an integral performer among many British opera companies, including ENO, WNO, Opera Scotland, and Glyndebourne from the 1970s to the 90s.
But did she perform at the Royal Opera House? Composer Dorothy Rudmore has died at the age of 81. She received commissions from the National Symphony, Opera Ebony, and Buffalo Philharmonic, among others. Considered one of her generation's leading composers of color, her music has been performed and recorded worldwide and includes chamber pieces, song cycles, orchestral music, and in 1985, the world premiere her opera, Frederick Douglass, in New York City.
And on this day, April 11th, in 1852, it was the first performance of Adolphe Adam's Le Roi des Halles. In 1866, it was the birth of Italian opera composer Ferruccio Busoni, a personal hero of mine. Walter Kaufmann, the German-American conductor and composer, was born on this day in 1907 in Karlsbad. In 1934, there was the birth in Vienna of conductor Henry Holt. In 1938, German bass Kurt Moll was born in Köln. And in 1965, it was the first performance of David Amram's Passover opera, The Final Ingredient, which premiered on television, recorded in New York City.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
Just a little bit of Dorothy Rudmore's opera, Frederick Douglass. That was from Act 2, a performance, actually wasn't a full performance. That was a little bit of a concert performance from the 2016 Atlanta Music Festival. And I couldn't decide whether we were going to hear Frederick Douglass or if we're going to hear Kurt Moll. And I think that we did an On This Day, April 11th, either last year or the year before, because I remember these names and this combination of...
It sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think we might have heard Kurt Moll singing Commendatore or something like that. I love Kurt Moll.
Maybe you, like me, just have like a little shrine to Ferruccio Busoni, and you're just very hyper aware of his birthday. You know.
Yeah. Now let's just get this straight. So in the opera bracket, I was asked to name 5 Handel operas. One of them I mentioned was Theodora. That didn't count. Now I find out that the nominees for Best New Opera Production for the Olivier Awards included Handel's Theodora.
Yeah, it's an oratorio, so...
I don't care if it won or lost. What I'm saying is, how could it be nominated for Best New Opera Production if it's not an opera?
Well, that's why it didn't win. Because they've decided that, this isn't really an opera. So even though...
You're like, our mistake. We retract that one.
Even though we have Jakub Josef Orlinski's Naked Cakes, it still doesn't win.
Oh, my goodness.
Those cakes.
And I love that English Touring Opera, or ETO as it's known, has a new writer-director. Of course, there was the whole kerfuffle earlier this year about the orchestra members were asked to reapply. There's some allegations of racism there. Most important is that I don't think you get to run English Touring Opera unless you have a double-barreled surname. So I think you have to be somebody like Robin Norton Hale.
Or like Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think she's going to be next on the roster.
Jennifer Love Hewitt.
There's so many of them.
Yeah.
At least 3 that we've named so far. This is a good use of our time. I think it's really a kind of a tragedy. I mean, obviously everything happening with the war right now in Ukraine is a tragedy. But I just find it ironic that we've been hearing a lot of propaganda from Putin, specifically how the West is canceling Tchaikovsky and everything's being, all this great Russian culture is being, destroyed and bemoaned by the West. And they're the ones literally leveling Tchaikovsky's old house, It really is a shame. There's a lot of history being lost over there, a lot of great cultural institutions, the Kharkiv Opera House, of course, and things like that. It's a real tragedy because the whole area of Eastern Europe, including Russia, have this great, amazing tradition of opera and culture, and it just goes to show that war really does bring out the worst in people, and all of that is lost. It does. It really is.
I mean, obviously, the loss of life is far and away, first and foremost, the most tragic
Oh,
and
absolutely,
disgusting thing
100%.
about this, right? That's not your point. But these places matter. That opera house matters. This villa matters.
Yes.
And these places are being lost.
So there was another story that we didn't end up talking about from our friends at Opera Wire, which lists more singers who are set to perform with Valery Gergiev at either the Mariinsky or at the Bolshoi. And they include names like Ildar Adrazakov and Ekaterina Semunchuk, among other names. I am a big fan of Adrazakov, and I just wonder if I'm...
Can't pronounce his name, though.
Well, you don't have to pronounce his last name when you're in bed. I just wonder if I'm like becoming like a McCarthyist or something like that. It's like where like all these people are like blacklisted, you know, and the artists that... Whatever. I mean, it's complicated because you know that some of them might feel pressure to, you know, stand with their national government because otherwise they would be like excommunicated, you know. And
Right.
Look, so it is complicated. These battle lines, pardon the metaphor, we knew they were going to be drawn. Okay, all we ask is that these artists do not use art as an excuse to have no political opinion. Like that does not wash, right? So what these artists are doing, they are taking a political stand, and I have to respect that, right? I don't agree with the stand that they're taking, right? I think they're with the bad guys, obviously, but at least they are artists and they are taking a political stand by singing in these concerts.
well, Russia can keep Yevgeny Nikitin. Honestly,
that guy's a real piece of work. Oh man,
honestly,
really
I've never.
I vaguely remembered like the original story from way back when.
Yeah.
It was years ago that he got
2012,
kicked
yep.
out. Yeah, exactly. 10 years ago. Jeez. Oh man. I remember this story when it came out, and I remember like he had like I think the excuse that time was like he was young, he didn't really know any better. But I apparently missed the point where he started saying that the tattoo was actually just an unfinished design for something else.
Yeah, he kept adding things to it.
Yeah, and then if you actually look at the completed tattoo, sure, the part where there was a swastika has been now blacked out, but there is still a bundle of sticks and an axe head on there, which if you are a savvy student of early 20th century history, you might recognize as the fasci.
Fascism, baby.
Which, is, it's a little less on the nose than a swastika, but I would say once you have two accidental Nazi symbols on you, you probably lose that excuse.
No.
And then, of course, now we just have another reason to get canceling with.
I mean, all you have to do is just type in Yevgeny Nikitin and the word tattoo into a search engine and see like the progress of this tattoo, like how it was clearly a swastika before it became whatever his family crest or whatever it is now.
Let's bring it home before we wrap up the segment. Atlanta Opera no longer requiring proof of vaccination or negative COVID test. Masks are encouraged, not required. Is this going to end in tears?
I mean, it's. I think probably. I don't think it's a good idea. I'm speaking as someone whose main opera company, I think I mentioned last week, growing up was the Atlanta Opera.
Is it an indoor venue?
Well, and that's part of the question that I have, and I wasn't quite sure because they also have their Big Tent series going on right now, which was a great way to sort of mitigate COVID risks, as well as being, artistically interesting. So I assume it's referring to indoor performances. I know that they're trying to introduce some indoor performances. I'm not 100% sure, so I could be eating my words next week. Feel free to correct me, listeners. But if it is for indoor performances, even if it's for outdoor performances, honestly, I do understand, there is a lot of pressure in the South. It's a more politically conservative area. And unfortunately, this has become a political issue. So there is more pressure from patrons to lift these kinds of requirements. But I really wish they wouldn't, and shout out to anyone at Atlanta Opera who also thinks this is a bad decision, and know that I understand you, and do your best to push forward or leave, whatever you need to do.
I mean, I think you talked about it last week, but right here in Chicago, there was an outbreak of COVID at our big opera house, and it almost entirely derailed their final performances of Fire Shut Up in My Bones and caused the company to panic cast Tosca chorus and small roles in Tosca.
I think you just
I'm making my lyric
Oliver.
opera debut as the sacristan. I just graduated from college.
I think you just coined a phrase there, panic casting. I love that, but they did. I mean, this episode's not about lyric, but yeah, they got a very, very close call on that lyric. I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if I respect the decision. I guess it depends if this is indoors or outdoors. I love the Big Tent outdoors. I think that's awesome. Toasty, man, Atlanta in September without AC.
It's true. And I imagine that is a factor in some decisions. And coming from the South, like, there are definitely huge swaths of the year you do not want to be outside.
Let's wrap this show up.
Good call. Bad call. On Opera Box Score.
Fast and Furious today on the OBS. Good call, bad call. We're going to take you home. Oliver Camacho.
I would be remiss if I did not promote or help promote the debut recording, solo recording of one of our favorite friends of the show. Rachel Willis Sorensen's solo album just came out last week. And unlike other artists who record these kind of rite of passage solo albums, this is actually repertoire which she sings, repertoire she's sung on stage. So it feels much more lived in, much more detailed, much more coached, for lack of a better word. I don't know how many recordings I've listened to of sopranos with glamorous voices who you can tell they just cracked open the score to record those arias. Rachel sounds incredible, and it also features some moments of duet moments with Jonas Kaufmann. He's a pretty good singer. And
you might have heard of him.
Yeah, and actually Olivia Kaler, mezzo-soprano, makes an appearance on this recording, and she has a relationship to Opera Box Score. I'll just leave it there. So a really wonderful thing all around. Please check it out.
Weston Williams.
My good call is the fact that here in Chicago, winter is finally breaking. Spring is upon us. I wore short sleeves outside today for the first time in what seems like 30, 40 years. I looked out at the lake. The ice floes were cracking away. The polar bears were going into hibernation for the summer. It was truly a wondrous sight to behold.
Can you make it about opera or sports, please?
The polar bears were singing Götterdämmerung.
Perfect.
Insane. Good call that the documentary about Michael Fabiano called Crescendo is coming out on Roku. Looking forward to seeing that.
Wasn't that originally on that other
platform
that died?
Quibi.
Quibi, yeah, Quibi.
Quibi.
Man, he knows how to pick them. The bad call.
Boy.
A couple weeks ago on the show, we talked about this production of Wagner's Rheingold that has 3 directors, one for each of the 3 acts. And I took a look at the production picture for the first act. Oh my Lord. I was blind for approximately 45 minutes afterwards.
Wow.
It's very Reggie Theater, isn't it?
We'll put a pic on that on the website. Might even be in the TDO show as well. Let's wrap it up.
That first one looks like David Hockney's Garbage. Like something he threw away.
Yeah, it's like the Hockney production of Turned Up, but just far, far worse. That is it for this week's edition of America's Talk radio show about opera. Our announcer, he's Norm Waddell. NormWaddell.com is how you find him. Again, if you're watching on Dallas Opera Network, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, get that full show. Stitcher and Spotify, you click follow. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, just hit the plus sign. Send us a voice memo or email us your hot takes, operaboxscore@gmail.com. You're going to get some merch, OBS beer coaster and lapel pin. Even Kenny got some from us, and boy, did he deserve it. Our creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Our audio and video editor is Weston Williams. For your co-host, Matt Cummings, I'm George Cedarquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you panic cast a COVID-infested production of Tosca. We're back with an all-new show next week when Sforzando rears its ugly head again. Plus, you get more opera headlines, you get more hot takes, and you get more enzymatically derived sweet white and yellow filling in a chocolate shell. Join us.
Delicious.